I'm going to start out with our first demo of Enterprise Capture. The first demo we're going to go through is using Enterprise Capture to check in content into the content server on-prem solution. The screen that I'm showing right now is the login screen after you log into the Enterprise Capture client. As we can see here, I have selected this batch. So we're seeing some batch information over here on the right associated with this batch that was scanned. I want to talk about some of the ingestion methods. I use this capture button here to manually upload documents from my desktop to create this batch here that has 2 documents inside of the batch. That capture button can also be configured to a scanner, a desktop scanner with a Twain driver. And if that's the case, you have a scanner on your desktop, you can drive everything from this screen rather than having to use the printer individually. Another ingestion method is a watch directory. A lot of times multifunctional devices are set up to be pointed to a watch directory that Capture is monitoring, and it will process those documents and bring batches of documents into the system. The last option there is for ingestion into the client is an email option. So you can configure an email address. You can configure Capture to look at the inbox folder. So that'll be importing everything that has an attachment to an email and processing those in here as batches. There's multiple documents. There'll be multiple files in the batch like we're seeing on the screen here. The next thing that I want to move into, we're going to select our first document here. So we can see I have a metadata profile set up associated to these documents called policies and procedures. You could have this broken apart where you have multiple metadata profiles. So certain documents, you could select a different metadata profile here, and different options would appear on the screen. So I'm going to type in the title here. This is a required field as noted by the asterisk. Description is not required, but we'll fill that in as well. So we get down to this third option here. This is configured to be a hard-coded pick list since these values aren't changing often. So one thing that you can do with a pick list is you can also configure a database lookup. So that will be dynamic in changing what values appear in this list as things are changing. That happens a lot with like cost centers and things like that when you're taking information like that. Those cost centers may be broken into 2 cost centers, and so that data may be changing a lot. So you'll want to have a more dynamic process so you don't have to update hard-coded lists all the time. Now, talking about database lookup, if there was a unique ID field here, like record ID, you could type in an ID, and you can also configure a database lookup, and then this icon would not be grayed out. You'd actually be able to hit search on that and populate all of this data that I manually keyed in. Pick lists and database lookups are really helpful in keeping consistent data, which can improve searching inside of Content Server. So just a few more things here. So we filled out document 1, we filled out the metadata. But as we toggle over to document number 2, we can see over here document 1 as the thumbnail. So we're going to see this move down here into document 2. I could have also just selected this page versus selecting the document 2 here in the list. But right now it's processing that page and it's loading this editor to give us a preview over here. When it switches over, we can now see that I can now key in metadata that's going to be associated to document 2 that can be different than document 1. So you can scan 100 documents at once, have them all broken apart, and then key everything at once and release the batch entirely. If one document did fail, that document would remain in the list underneath the batch name, but the rest of the documents would be released. One thing to note up here, this toolbar here, say I scanned this page was backwards, you can use these tools here to actually rotate the page so you don't have to scan everything again. I'm just going to fill in this information here. So the next thing here that I want to talk about, if I did open this batch right now, you can see that this icon has a lock. If I needed to unlock this document and let another user enter this batch to key information that I didn't know or something of that nature, you can use this unlock feature and actually unlock the batch. That's a newer feature in 12C. But what we're doing right now is we're going to use the commit setting, and we're actually going to release this document into content server. We're going to do both these documents at once. So we'll go ahead and click that release button. And what it's doing right now, it's authenticating against the content server, making sure that we have the required metadata for our check-in procedure, and running any various advanced scripts that we may have to capture extra data, timestamps, and things like that to check into various fields. As we can see now, it has changed to this gear icon. That means it is checking everything into the content server. And if we do a refresh, we can see that that batch has now disappeared from our list, meaning that it is in the content server. So if we go over here to our content server that is configured, we can just do a general search, and we can see that my two documents are right here at the top of the list, checked in today by WebLogic. So now the next part of the enterprise capture demo I want to show, I'm going to switch over to a city records profile that is configured. We can see that I already have a batch in here. I uploaded that in the same way. I just manually selected documents off my desktop. We can see that I am uploading a seating chart, an updated seating chart because of COVID. So this is where everyone's going to be sitting in the admin office for COVID, so everyone is distant. We can see that we have one metadata field set up here. Same principle applies as in the other one. You can have as many fields as you want and as many different document profiles as you want right in here for when you're processing documents. So I'm just going to go ahead and give this a nice record number, 7698. Now, when we release this, what's going to happen, the city records profile is actually configured to check into Oracle and Experience Cloud. So this will be checked into the cloud. It will retain this metadata profile that is configured. Right now, what this is doing is similar to what happened with the content server. It's logging into Oracle Experience Cloud, validating that all of the required metadata is there and everything is valid. So authenticating and all of that. We can see that we got our gear icon, which means that this document should have moved into the cloud. So we'll refresh this, make sure the batch is gone from the list. If there was an error, it would come back with a warning icon, and then you can expand that and see that error there. So if we go back to the browser, we're going to switch over to the content server here. That document is configured to come into this capture folder. So if we give this a refresh, we can now see that my seating chart PDF is here. We'll go ahead and open up this document. And if we go and look at the custom properties here, we can come down to the bottom and see that our record number is still associated with this document. One thing I do want to mention with enterprise capture. Now, when using email or Watch Directory, and you're just trying to process documents, maybe necessarily there's not any data that needs to be associated to that document, you can do an automated pass-through where documents in that Watch Directory or email inbox are processed and then just directly checked into the content server or Oracle Experience Cloud. You can also do it where you have what's called an LST file, which is kind of like a delimited text file, to bring associated metadata with during that automated process. You can also send it with one field and do a database lookup, and it will fill in all of the metadata for you and check it into the content server. If something went wrong or there's a missing required field, which is the most common error, that it's missing something that was required during that automated process, those documents would just show back up in this list for somebody to process and fill out the remaining required metadata for that to be checked in, and then you could re-release that batch and push the content in. Now, what I kind of want to do here, that's the end of enterprise capture. I want to switch gears. I'm going to move into Enterprise Batch Loader. I'm going to bring up a virtual machine that I have. What we have here is a Windows server. In this Fishbowl folder, there is the EBL program installed. Inside of this EBL program is different settings, your configuration on how it's going to process these documents. If you're using a preprocessor to create a BLF from a JSON file or delimited text file, all of that configuration is in here. So that's one cool thing with the BLF and the preprocessor is that you can take in other files. You can write a script and create your BLF file on the fly if you don't have a way to export a BLF file directly with your content that you have metadata associated to. So this program right now is configured to watch this watch directory. So I have some test files here. We'll be dropping those into that watch directory and watching them process through into the content server. But before I get into that, I want to talk about a recent scenario that I went through with a client. They have an application that they were using called FormFast. This is set up to have a certain retention policy. After those documents got past that retention policy, they needed somewhere to store those documents for history. If they had to go back and look at it, they wanted it to be in another system. They chose content servers where they wanted that to live. They use EBL, and every end of the week, they run their retention policy check, and anything that meets that criteria gets taken from FormFast. It gets generated with a BLF file and the document. Those two documents are associated together. They get dropped in a watch directory that EBL is watching. They process both of those documents and check it into the content server, and then that form still has all of the associated metadata that can be searched on. So if they ever had to go back and find an old form that they had sent out, they can go back and find that in their history repository inside of content server. So we'll go in here, we're going to select multiple documents at once, just because if you're just passing through documents from some various system or a network drive that you have 1,000 documents in and you want to upload it all to content server, you can simply take the EBL program, configure the watch directory to be that network share, and it'll just process all of the documents. So just drop these 4 in here, and within a minute or so, we'll see EBL start turning through them. It generated some BLF files. The BLF file in this case is simple. The preprocessor is taking the location of the document and then also passing in the command of check-in. So the content server then knows to check in this document. This is where the document lives and processes through. We'll bring back up the content server here. And if we do a general search, we can see now that I just checked in another 4 documents. So as a quick recap of what we saw today, first demo that I went through with the policy and procedures, that was using Enterprise Capture to process documents and check them into content server on-prem. Then we moved into a demo about using Enterprise Capture to check in content into Oracle Experience Cloud. And then we moved into our last demo, Enterprise Batch Loader, showing you a scenario of batch loading multiple documents at once into the content server. With that, now I'll turn it back over to Jason Lehman